The bookstore in Oakland buzzed with anticipation. Fans lined the aisles, clutching copies of Stephen Curry's new memoir, their faces bright with admiration and excitement. The air smelled faintly of new pages, coffee, and hope. Children shuffled nervously next to their parents, basketballs in hand, sneakers tapping against linoleum floors. Among them stood Jasmine Taylor, 12 years old, thin as a wisp of wind, her oversized warrior's hoodie hanging off her shoulders like borrowed armor. She had waited in line for nearly an hour, holding her breath every time the line inched forward, afraid that someone might notice the slight tremble in her fingers or the way she kept pressing her stomach, trying to quiet the growling within. Her shoes were worn at the edges, and her jeans, faded and frayed, had long outgrown her. But none of that mattered, not now. Because at the end of the line, just a few feet away, was her hero. Her lighthouse in the fog. Stephen Curry. When it was finally her turn, Jasmine stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. She handed the book over with both hands, like an offering. Curry looked up and smiled. Genuinely, the way you smile when you're not just being polite. His eyes sparkled for a second as he said her name. Jasmine, right? Reading from the post-it note inside the cover. Yes, she said softly. Her voice barely registered above the hum of the crowd. He began to sign, asking casually, "So, you play ball?" She nodded, hesitated, and then, as if the words escaped before she could stop them, she blurted out, "I'm hungry." The pen in his hand froze. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. His smile faltered, not out of annoyance but surprise. Real human surprise, the kind that leaks into the space between words and actions, the kind that breaks the autopilot of celebrity routine. He looked up again, this time not at her name or her book, but at her eyes. Hungry. It wasn't a joke. Her eyes didn't joke. They held something else, something raw, unfiltered, and piercing. It wasn't the kind of hunger that begged for a snack or a treat. It was deeper. It was the kind of hunger that had weight. The kind that pulled at your ribs and made the world a colder place. The kind that didn't ask to be noticed, but screamed in silence. For a second, Curry felt a strange, uncomfortable tightness in his chest. His body remembered things his life no longer required. Empty fridges, single mothers, late rent, prayers whispered to ceilings. And now here she was, a child. Not crying, not begging, just stating a fact. Like one might say, it's raining or the sky is blue. He leaned in, lowering his voice, his signature forgotten. "You're hungry?" he asked gently. She nodded. Her eyes didn't flinch. "Like, right now?" "Yes," she said. It was the honesty of it that struck him. Clarity. No shame. No drama. Just truth. Stark and unadorned. Curry closed the book slowly. "Would you like to get lunch with me?" The girl blinked. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Behind her, her grandmother stepped forward. Gloria, wiry and watchful, clutching a worn handbag like a lifeline. Curry looked up and gave her a nod of reassurance. "If it's okay with you, ma'am, I'd like to treat you both to a meal." There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough for the world to shift. Long enough for a thread to pull tight between fate and choice. Gloria nodded. "We'd be honored." And just like that, the line stopped. Security blinked in confusion. Fans murmured. Cameras tilted. But Stephen Curry didn't care. For in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the book, not the crowd, not the optics. A child had spoken, not in metaphor or parable, but in pure, unvarnished truth. And the truth had changed everything. The restaurant they sat in wasn't extravagant. Just a quiet spot a few blocks from the bookstore, with warm lights and the smell of grilled chicken and seasoned fries drifting through the air. But to Jasmine, it might as well have been a palace. She sat at the edge of the booth like she wasn't sure she was allowed to sink into the cushion, like she might be asked to leave if she got too comfortable. Her eyes flicked between the silverware and the laminated menu, cautious, calculating the cost of everything even though she wasn't paying. Stephen had ordered them a full meal. Burgers, fries, a pitcher of lemonade, even dessert. But Jasmine hadn't touched her drink. Not yet. Her hands were still wrapped tightly around the glass like she needed to be sure it was really hers before she took a sip. Gloria sat beside her, her face tired but polite, eyes darting between her granddaughter and the man who had offered them this unexpected kindness. "So," Curry said gently, "how long have you two lived in Oakland?" There was a hesitation. "Long one." "Not long," Gloria said at last. Her voice was soft but layered, with fatigue, with caution. "We moved back a few months ago. Used to live here years ago, before Jasmine was born." "You moved back?" he asked, careful not to pry but hoping to understand. "Why now?" Gloria looked at Jasmine, then back at Curry. She sighed. "Because there wasn't anywhere else left to go." And with that one sentence, the doors began to open, not flung wide, but just enough for the shadows to start spilling out. The truth, raw and hesitant, began to take shape between bites of food and sips of lemonade. Jasmine's mother, Gloria's daughter, had passed away the year before. It had been sudden, cruel, an undiagnosed condition that had taken her in a matter of days. There had been no insurance, no savings, no backup plan. Just grief and bills, and a child who needed more than tears and memories. Gloria, already retired, had taken Jasmine in without hesitation. But retirement checks didn't stretch far, not in a city where rent climbed higher than hope. So they had come to Oakland, where Gloria had once worked in a bakery and knew a few people who still owed her favors. They found a tiny apartment above a laundromat. The noise was constant, but the rent was manageable, and most nights the warm air from the dryers kept the chill from creeping in. Jasmine listened quietly as her grandmother spoke, her burger forgotten. It wasn't shame she felt, it was something heavier, like the burden of understanding too much too soon. She knew why they skipped meals. She knew why Gloria sometimes gave excuses for not turning on the heat. She knew the codes. "We're fine" meant "we'll manage," which really meant "I don't want you to worry." She also knew how to pretend. Pretend at school, pretend in front of the social workers, pretend when her friends talked about vacations or birthday parties. Jasmine had mastered the art of smiling without showing her teeth, laughing without fully breathing. Stephen listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable at first. But in the quiet moments when neither of them spoke, his fingers tapped against the table in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. He wasn't just hearing their story, he was absorbing it, feeling it seep beneath his skin, into the parts of him that still remembered nights without dinner and mothers who worked 2 shifts just to keep the lights on. "What about Jasmine's dad?" he asked gently. Another silence, this one colder. "Gone," Gloria said. "Never stayed long enough to matter." Curry didn't push. He just nodded. Jasmine finally spoke. Her voice was steady but low. "Grandma says it's okay to miss someone even if they didn't stay. But sometimes I wonder if he'd come back if he knew I was good at basketball." Stephen's chest tightened. Not for the first time that day. "You're more than good at basketball, Jasmine," he said. "You're strong. That matters more." She looked up at him, then really looked. And for a moment her defenses cracked. Just a little. Just enough for something soft and aching to shine through. "You think so?" He smiled. "I know so." And in that small booth, on that ordinary afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Not with fireworks or fanfare, but in the quiet forming of connection. Between a star and a stranger. Between a child and the possibility that someone might truly see her. Not as a project or a pity case but as a person. Someone worth noticing. Someone worth believing in. The lunch table was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a fragile sanctuary. A temporary shelter from the relentless storm of uncertainty that had so often shadowed Jasmine's life. Each bite carried weight far beyond its taste. Each glance exchanged between Jasmine and Stephen hummed with an unspoken question, a tentative hope. The warm hum of the restaurant around them blurred into the background, the chatter and clinking plates fading beneath the quiet, electric pulse between 2 strangers crossing paths at the edge of despair and possibility. Stephen watched Jasmine carefully, noting how she hesitated before picking up her burger, as if the simple act of eating was a luxury she had to ration. The way her fingers trembled slightly, betraying a nervousness that no confident smile could fully hide. There was something raw, exposed in her presence, a wound not yet healed, but desperately trying to close. He felt a swell of protectiveness rise in him, a yearning to reach across the distance of their lives and pull her from the shadows that clung too tightly. "Jasmine," he said softly, "if you ever want to talk about basketball, school, or anything, I'm here." Her eyes lifted to meet his, flickering with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. It was the kind of kindness she had rarely encountered, unconditional, patient, free of judgment. For a moment, the walls she had built so carefully around her heart felt like they might crumble. But then the fear crept back. The fear that this moment, like so many others, might be fleeting. That soon she'd return to the cramped apartment, the echoing silence, the unspoken struggles etched into every corner. That this kindness might be a fragile illusion, a brief detour on a road lined with disappointments. "I don't know if anyone's ever really been here for me," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "People say it, but then they leave." Stephen's heart ached at the truth in her words. He knew too well the sting of abandonment, the scars left behind by those who promised safety but vanished when it mattered most. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, reaching out to gently touch her hand. The contact was tentative, respectful, but it carried a warmth that seemed to seep beneath her skin. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in you." Jasmine's gaze dropped, a single tear escaping down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but of release, a small crack in the fortress of her loneliness. Outside, the sunlight filtered through the windows, casting soft patterns on the table, as if nature itself was marking the beginning of something new. The world beyond their booth continued in its relentless pace, but here time seemed to pause, granting them a fleeting reprieve from the burdens they both carried. Stephen thought of the years behind him, the losses, the regrets, the roads not taken. He saw in Jasmine not just a girl struggling to survive, but a spark waiting to ignite into something fierce and unyielding. He wanted to be the one to help her find that fire, to light a path through the darkness. When the meal ended, Jasmine stood with a steadiness that had been absent before. There was a subtle shift in her posture, a newfound resolve, however fragile. "Thank you," she said quietly, voice steadier now. "For the meal. For this." Stephen smiled, the kind of smile that carried promises without words. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You'll see." And as they stepped out into the bright afternoon light, the city seemed less daunting, less indifferent. Somewhere between the shadows and the sun, a fragile thread of hope had taken hold, one that might, if nurtured, grow into something strong enough to change the course of both their lives. The seed of hope that had taken root during that tentative lunch now began to grow, fragile yet relentless, demanding attention and careful tending. Stephen sat in his quiet apartment that evening, the city's distant lights flickering like a constellation of unseen possibilities. His mind raced, weaving threads of ideas and ambitions into a tapestry that could pull Jasmine from the edges of survival into the realm of real change. He knew that goodwill and kind words were not enough, not for Jasmine, not for the reality she faced every day. The walls of hardship that surrounded her were thick, made of years of missed opportunities, closed doors, and silent sacrifices. If he wanted to make a difference, he had to act with precision, patience, and a plan that could withstand the weight of disappointment. The plan took shape slowly, piece by piece. Stephen's past experience in community programs and youth development sparked ideas. He imagined a support system, more than just a helping hand, but a network that could catch Jasmine before she fell, lift her beyond the limit she had been forced to accept. He thought of education first, knowing it was the foundation on which Jasmine's future could be rebuilt. Scholarships, tutoring, mentoring, tools that would equip her with knowledge and confidence. Then the subtle but vital lifelines, counseling to heal the invisible wounds, job opportunities that could restore a sense of purpose and dignity, and a safe space where dreams could breathe without fear. But it wasn't just about Jasmine alone. Stephen realized that to truly break the cycle, the entire family needed a chance a chance to rewrite their story together. He imagined small, steady steps that could rebuild trust, repair fractured bonds, and create a home not just of shelter, but of belonging. As the hours passed, the plan crystallized in his mind, but beneath the calculated logic, his heart throbbed with a more vulnerable truth: the fear of failure. What if this effort, this gamble on a future uncertain, crumbled? What if Jasmine's wounds were too deep to heal? The shadows of his own past whispered doubts, but he pushed them aside, clinging to the fragile light that had flickered so briefly and brilliantly at lunch. The next day, Stephen sought out allies, people who shared his belief in second chances. He reached out to educators, counselors, local charities, anyone who could offer expertise, resources, or a compassionate hand. With each conversation, the plan expanded, becoming more tangible, more real. But amid this growing momentum, Stephen was acutely aware of Jasmine's quiet resilience. She had not yet seen the full scope of his vision, and he knew the road ahead would be fraught with moments of doubt, resistance, and raw emotion. Change was not a gift to be handed over. It was a challenge to be met together. When he finally approached Jasmine with the outline of his plan, the vulnerability in her eyes was unmistakable. She listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes silent, caught between hope and fear. The past had taught her to protect herself by expecting the worst. Now, she faced the terrifying possibility that things could be different. "I don't want to be a charity case," she whispered one afternoon, voice tight with emotion. "I want to stand on my own." Stephen's response was gentle but firm. "This isn't about charity, Jasmine. It's about belief. About seeing your worth when the world hasn't. You have strength in you. Strength that deserves to be seen, to be nurtured." In that moment, the fragile alliance between them shifted. It was no longer just a plan. It was a promise. A shared commitment to fight against the tide of despair and carve out a new path, one painstaking step at a time. And as the city pulsed around them, indifferent and unyielding, two lives began to intertwine with purpose, driven by a plan born not just of strategy, but of unwavering faith in the human spirit's capacity to rise. The ripple of change was subtle at first, like the faintest tremor beneath a calm sea, but it grew steadily, impossible to ignore once it reached the surface. Jasmine's life, once a quiet expanse of struggle and survival, began to pulse with an unfamiliar energy, a fragile, flickering flame of possibility that neither she nor Stephen had dared to fully imagine in the earlier, darker days. It wasn't just Jasmine who felt the shift. The people around her, the worn faces of her family, the weary neighbors, even the distant acquaintances who had long written her off, started to notice. The way Jasmine held herself a little straighter, the tentative spark in her eyes, the rare but genuine smiles that touched her lips, all these were signals that whispered of transformation. Stephen watched these changes with a mixture of pride and profound humility. He knew that progress was never linear, that setbacks would come, and shadows might creep back to test their resolve. But in this delicate dance between hope and hardship, something more powerful was emerging. The slow unspooling of belief, not just in Jasmine, but in everyone who touched her story. The local community center, once a mere backdrop to Jasmine's daily routine, became a hub of quiet revolution. Other young people, drawn by the subtle promise of support and understanding, began to show up. They carried their own burdens, their own fractures, but in the shared space Stephen helped nurture, they found fragments of healing. It was a space where broken pieces could be gathered and carefully pieced together. Jasmine found herself stepping into roles she had never envisioned. Mentor to a younger girl struggling with her own demons, advocate in small meetings, a voice that, while still tender, gained strength with each passing day. The fragile girl who had once doubted if anyone could ever be here, for her was becoming a beacon for others lost in the same darkness. Yet, beneath this growing light, the shadows remained. Jasmine's family, while warmed by her progress, wrestled with their own scars and resistance. Old wounds reopened. Unspoken grievances bubbled beneath polite smiles. The path toward healing was jagged, the effort to mend not just one heart but many a delicate and demanding task. Stephen's role evolved too. No longer just a distant helper, He became a steadfast presence, a witness to the messy, painful process of change. There were moments of raw confrontation, tears that fell in the quiet of night, and breakthroughs that left them both breathless with hope. The ripple extended beyond Jasmine's immediate world. Teachers who had once seen her as just another struggling student began to reassess their expectations, influenced by the tangible proof that given support, potential could bloom even in the most unlikely soil. Friends and acquaintances who had grown cynical found themselves drawn into the current of transformation, reminded of their own capacity for compassion and action. In this unfolding story, the simple act of one person believing in another created waves that reached far beyond the edges of a single life. It was a testament to the profound truth that change, no matter how slow or small, carries within it the power to reshape not just individual destinies but the very fabric of a community. And as Jasmine looked back one evening, standing at the window of her now brighter home, she no longer saw a future defined by struggle alone. She saw a horizon tinged with possibility, still uncertain, still demanding courage, but undeniably hers to claim.